We all know that the right habits and mindsets can be transformational in how we live our lives. But among the sea of advice online, it can be challenging to know who to trust with these important life decisions. At The Standard, we answer those questions and introduce you to some of the most successful people in the world in their fields and the habits and the mindsets they use to achieve their success. To learn more about our social platform, head on over to www.thestandardapp.com. And now, your host, myself, Chris Pallatroni. Welcome to another episode of The Standard. I am your host, Chris Pallatroni, and today's guest is Nidhi Pandya. She is an Ayurvedic coach and doctor helping women live their best life. I've known Nidhi for a couple of years. She was actually one of the very first people to contribute with any of her habits on The Standard. So if you get a chance, please do check that out. She's got about 5 or 6 out there. But this was a really fun episode. I am not very familiar with her teachings and sort of the ancient practice of more holistic health, at least the way that she practices it. So this was both enlightening for me. I got a little schooled before this episode with my trainer, Kate Sanders, who knows a lot about this. Kate, thank you for the insight. But yeah, we covered a lot of ground in this. You can tell she has profound wisdom. And what I loved about this is there is an interconnectedness among all things in the universe, on our planet, between each of us. And she really believes that. I'm a big believer in that as well. And so she was able to distill down some of the ways that she looks at mental health and well-being. We talk about her practice of breath work and grounding, or I should say breathing and grounding, and the practicality that has to bring her into the now and sort of remove some anxious thoughts. We get into the why and some of the technique that's involved with that. And then she had a really beautiful mindset of it's the experience, not the outcome, which I internalized as it's not the destination, it's the journey. So a lot of connection there. There's a lot of really fun things that we sort of dive into here between nature and children and anxiety and so forth. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. So without any further ado, this is Nidhi Pandya. Well, first of all, just thank you so much for joining. I was actually looking at my notes, and I think you and I first met about 2 years ago, not exactly to the date, but somewhere around there when I was first building this project. And I remember our first conversation and all the videos that you supplied for The Standard. I remember watching them, and I thought they were great. So super excited to have you on. So thanks for being a guest. I do appreciate it.
No, thank you so much, Chris, for having me and for all the great work that you're doing for everybody in the world. So thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I know a fair amount about you, but I recognize some of the listeners may not know so much. So I'd love it if you could take a couple minutes and just share a little of your background. We don't got to go all the way to your childhood, but I know you have such an interesting background in the way that you practice your habits and also your teachings. I know we talked a little bit about that coming into this podcast. So maybe you can just take a couple minutes and just share a little bit of who you are and then also who you are as a professional. And I think that will sort of like set the stage for where we head.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to try to be quick on this one.
No, take your time.
So I technically, I'm an Ayurvedic doctor. If you're familiar with Ayurveda, anybody who's listening, I don't practice Ayurveda as a system of wellness or medicine. I actually practice Ayurveda as the science of life, which is what it literally translates into. I've used the Ayurvedic wisdom to kind of understand the code of the universe, to decipher the code of the universe, and then understand where we as human beings, our minds and our bodies, we kind of have a rhythm that needs to align with the rhythm of the universe so everything on this planet can beat together. So how we think, how we eat, how we live, how we interact with everybody. I mostly work with women and children because that's where my heart lies, to really transform all their pain into power. So healing and really empowering yourselves to live your best life. That's the work that I do. Part of my background really plays into what I do today because I grew up back in India. My grandfather was an Ayurvedic healer. I grew up in a large joint family, but I really grew up with this whole, like a very questioning mindset. Like, how do we live better? How do we eat better? How do we interact better? So a great growth mindset was a gift to me with access to Vedic sciences as well. And I think it all came together to bring me where I am today. And I'm still, as we all are, I've still, just gone there. I'm very, at the start of my journey. I hope to do a lot more.
Yeah, I love that. I was looking at a couple of your posts, and there's so much that you, although it is more geared towards women, I think there's such a universal application in some ways. And I think I caught one of your posts about coaches of like, hey, even if we're a coach, we don't know it all. And I think it's so awesome because, as you become more experienced, you read more books, you practice more, maybe this is sort of the life or the swim lane that you're in, you start to realize like how much knowledge is really out there. And no matter how much you start to have an appreciation for, oh my God, as much as I know so little in comparison to what's really out there. I'll be honest, I don't know too much about your particular practice. It was interesting because I have a personal trainer and she's like, well, who's going to be your guest today? And I was talking about you and she's like, oh my God, if I could she's a fitness coach and nutrition. She's like, if I could start all over again, I would totally be exactly what you are. And I was like, so school me a little bit. What's this about? And I think for some people listening, the idea of like connecting to the universe and we're all interconnected can feel a little woo-woo-y, but I love it. Like I am a huge nature avid. I think we all live in an ecosystem. It's something we should be paying attention to. So I'd love you to like maybe go down a detour a little bit of like, why should people care about that? Like
100%. I think, thank you for asking me that, Chris, right? Because very often people just want to dive into how should we eat, what should we do, what's right for the season. And I think this is where the key lies, the question that you just asked me. And the one thing I will say that, how you said, hey, there's so much knowledge out there. I'd like to add something to that. There is so much knowledge in here, right? So there is knowledge out there in the universe, and there is so much knowledge that there's a universe inside of us. Mm-hmm. And the ability to know ourselves within and to observe our patterns and to tune into what's happening in your body and your mind and your psyche, that by itself presents a major opportunity, a potential for growth, manifestation, and knowing the universe. And again, this brings me back to the question you asked me, is all of my work is based on this one Vedic sutra, one Vedic verse, which says, as is the cosmos, as is the macrocosmos, such is the microcosmos. As is the microcosmos, such is the macro. To learn about the micro, I got to look at the macro. I got to tune into its patterns, its day and night, the wind and the fire, and what's that doing to the world outside. And then I understand what happens in the world inside. And we can use examples. I'll give you examples. Similarly, if I really study the way my own body works, how it wakes up, how it sleeps, how it reacts to wind, how it reacts to triggers, I can understand how the world works outside. One of the jokes that I make is that, Chris, we know that one of the biggest things that are today, like in the health world, that people are suffering from is inflammation. Mm-hmm. And outside in the world is global warming. Right? So it is not a coincidence, even though I'm not going to say it's global warming that's led to this, but it's basically the reaction of the overexposure to the sun and these gases and what's that doing to the planet. We've had climate change with it. So I basically kind of work with this whole idea of circadian rhythm, of patterns that the planet follows as, the day and night cycles, and we diurnal mammals. And everything in the world is about spotting patterns. So how do you spot patterns? Like for example, I'm just going to use a few examples as we're digressing and going into this. That the sun will heat and dry the earth. And the moon will kind of bring coolness and moisture, right? That's when the morning is cooler as soon as you wake up, because the night is things around, and there's dew on the grass. And so these are the two different energies that the sun and the moon bring. We ourselves have the ability to take those solar and lunar energies. For example, if you have anything that's very hot and spicy, or even if coffee, which is dehydrating. It's basically solar consumption. It's going to heat you, it's going to dry you. If you have coconut, it's lunar consumption. So how the sun needs the moon to be balanced, the moon needs the sun to be balanced, we need those two energies working together in tandem to be in balance. And we've become really solar beings. We're moving more, we're exercising more, we're staying up more, and we've lost those lunar energies. Right? So this is just one example. But this whole idea of understanding the world outside and trying to understand the world inside through it can be extended to every aspect of our being.
Yeah. And I'm not going to speak too intelligently on this because this definitely steps outside of my knowledge, but I've always been at a very young age so fascinated with the universe. Like just so, my wife jokingly likes to say like, why don't you tell me a little bit about space so I can like scratch her and she can like fall asleep. But I'm always trying to understand like, it's so interesting how we're on this little blue dot and like the distance between stars and like the fact that there's an observable universe and like, where's their life? So I'm always sort of like tiptoeing in that. And that naturally leads into, if you want to go down this road, trying to understand quantum mechanics and string theory, which are things like I will not speak intelligently on. However, one of the things I've taken away, and I was listening to a couple of Brian Greene's, who's just wicked smart. And he's talking about string theory, which is the study of things on a microscopic scale. Like so tiny. And one of the points is that at its most smallest scale, everything's just energy. And I'm always like, I think we've all heard the saying of like, what you put out there in the universe is what you attract back to you. It's the whole idea of like positive attracts positive and whatnot. And I'm a massive believer of like the energy that you have does radiate out and does influence things that do happen to you. So I think that's always an interesting point. And then the other one is being such a fanatic of nature. I stumbled across these books where, a lot of like our modern products take lessons from nature. So they'll study like how a duck stays, dry underneath its belly when it's on the water because it secretes oils and it like does that, or like the aerodynamicness of a shark. And I know these things are like seem benign, but the point is like these are millions and millions of years of evolution, and we're trying to like steal those lessons and pull them forward to apply them to humans. And so anyways, both of those on the very grand scale and the more in nature, I just can't help but think we're all interconnected. And like to your point earlier, the answers are right there. It's just a matter of whether we can decode them in a way and apply them to ourselves, but it's there. And so I think this is really the study of how to like be more in tune with it.
Yeah, I think it's really the study of getting less information and finding more knowledge. And information is something that you take to the front of your brain, in my opinion, and it's not internalized because it's like a prescription. But knowledge is something that you can take in, experience, and internalize. And that only can happen if you've seen it, you've experienced it, you've seen it around you in the world. And that's the reason why I like to use the patterns of the universe to understand patterns of the human body and mind.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let's dive into you. So, as I was mentioning when we met a couple of weeks ago, so much of this podcast is, not looking at all of your good habits or all of your good mindsets, but really trying to focus on one that you believe is impacting your life today. So I know you've got a couple kids, you run a business, you've got a lot of different balls that you're juggling in the air. And so I'm so curious, like what habit do you feel is supporting you the most at this stage of your life?
So like a mindset, right?
We're going to do both. We're going to do one habit and then we're going to do one mindset. We'll start with a habit and then we'll flip over to a mindset. So is there one that you feel is disproportionately impacting like your mental health and your well-being and ultimately your success at this stage for you?
Yeah, and I think that habit for me, it sounds really small, but it's really, really powerful, is coming back to my breath and my feet several times a day. Which means that right now, Chris, right, like I'm talking to you, and it's so easy to get in our heads. But then the minute I become aware of my breath, and I ground my feet, which I am doing right now as I'm speaking, you're not speaking to your mind anymore. You start channelizing the power of the universe because you come in the present moment. I live in New York City, and I think when I see the world around me, and I see even myself at many points in the day, you're always living in the future. Mostly you're also like, I have to get there, the elevator has to come, this has to happen, that's tomorrow. That all of that is aging, all of that is depreciation. Coming back to the present moment is really being in flow, where your nervous system is not processing, it's not taking in anything, it's not going to the future, it's just there. And for me, it's that coming back to the breath each time and grounding my feet brings me there. It's like suddenly the prefrontal cortex shuts down and I'm in flow.
Yeah.
Instant formula for flow.
You actually shared this particular habit. I was reviewing all the different habits that you had shared on the standard. I know breath work was one of those particular habits, but let's see if we can sort of expand on that a little bit, because I think there's some listeners that are like, yeah, I totally get it. We all have to breathe. That's great. So maybe we'll start off with like, why is focusing on breath work? Like, I know you said it brings you back into the present moment. I don't want to assume why that's important to you, but walk me through like maybe just the why, and then we'll get into like what that breath work might look like. But why is focusing on breath work and grounding your feet, why is that so critical for you?
So I'll tell you, when I said breath right now, it's not breath work.
Okay.
Breath work is something else.
Okay.
I definitely am a big advocate for that. And that really brings back the climate of your body to where it should be. But that's breath work.
Okay.
And that's more of an internal thing. It does help your nervous system, but that's not what I'm talking about now. What I'm talking about right now is when you bring awareness to the present moment, which means when you bring awareness to your breath is the connector between the world inside and the world outside. It is what brings us life. It's the only thing that basically exists in both places, that's interacting in both places at any given point. You're taking oxygen and you're giving it out. It fuels your body inside, it takes away everything from outside, and you can actually experience it. That's why when you go to a yoga class and you become so in tune with your breath, you suddenly feel like this flow, right? Because you're disconnected from everything else. It connects your body of energy to your body of matter. The breath connects both. The breath is basically, it has its own energetics. When there's no breath, we die. That energy, the life force, which by itself is not tangible, is taken out of our system through the breath. So when I say you come back to the breath, I'm just becoming aware of my natural breath that's already a part. It sounds easy, right, Chris? But I'll tell you, it takes some work. It took years. That when I was younger, my mom used to be the person who used to be like, come back to your breath, observe your breath. And I'm like, what the hell does this mean? Like, what does it mean to come back to your breath? And then I was pregnant with my firstborn about 16 years ago. And my yoga teacher at that point, in an Ayurvedic studio, very traditional, would put me in a pose and keep me there for like 8 minutes. And I had nothing to do in that pose, right? I'm like, what do I do? And she was like, yeah, just notice what's happening with your breath. And then all I did was bring awareness to my breath. And I saw it slowing down. I think he's just witnessing. And each time I did that, I used to go into a trance. I mean, it's that place between awake and asleep where you become a power manifester. So basically, it's really coming back to being zero. I think it's the closest experience to being one with the universe, one with everything around you, forgetting about your past garbage or baggage, forgetting about your future worries, and just coming here. So it is a very powerful moment. You connect with a deeper intelligence every time you come to the present moment.
Yeah, you mentioned the word flow a couple times. What does that mean to you when you say the word flow?
It's exactly that. I'm not thinking, I'm happening. I'm not human doing, I'm human being. Actions are just, they're happening. Not to say that my own intelligence and decisions are not making it into it, but it's with an ease where there's less rigidity, there's less tightness, there's no fear, there's no shame, there's no guilt, there's no planning. The planning has been done. I'm not going to say planning is important. There's a time for planning. So like this is what I even tell my girls, right? When you are planning as you're doing, oh my God, I have this chapter to finish, so now I'm going to do that. Okay, first I'm going to do this and then you do. When you're planning, as you're doing, that's anxiety. You plan first and then you put yourself into this whole state of being and let it all unfold. And it often does, Chris. Like, I know that there are times where I'm like, oh my God, I have to wake up in the morning, I have to do this, I have to take a flight, and I have to come back. If I actually thought about this actively with my mind, it would create terrible anxiety. But by learning to just be in this flow, that I've planned it out, my brain knows what it needs to do, my body knows what it needs to do. I'm going to trust it, breath by breath, moment by moment, I'm going to let it happen. And Chris, I'm that ridiculous person that I'll have a flight to India that I have to leave for at 5 o'clock, I have to leave home. I'll be getting a foot massage at 3 because everything is done. I do live, I'm a single mother, I live in New York City with my 2 daughters who go to school on different sides of the city. One is on the east side, one is on the west side. One is 15, one is 11.
Yeah.
And I have full-time work, and I refuse to give up on my friends and my family.
Good for you.
But I will say, for the most part, I am in ease. And that's what flow is to me. It's devoid of a state of mind which feels rigid, scared, worried, shame, or guilty.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago this idea of grounding as well while you're doing this breathwork. Can you explain a little bit of what that means to you?
Yeah. And grounding is, again, coming back to the first thing that I do while grounding is my feet. Sometimes the mind is in too many places. Just the breath does not cut it. You kind of think, to me, it's like this massive force of wind. It's in all directions. The wind is scattering everything away. Your papers, your belongings, it's all like a really, really windy beach. And that's happened to me before. I sat with my mat and I put out everything on my picnic basket. And then before I knew it, it was like all gone, right? And that's what's usually happening in our nervous systems all the time. And this coming back to breath and coming back to ground is like all of this noise, all of this madness just comes down. And like that genie gets into a lamp, it kind of gets channelized into your system. And when I say grounding, it's literally feeling my feet on the floor, the experience of where they touch, how they fall, the contact points. And sometimes it's even beyond that. Sometimes it's not only my feet, it's like how the fabric is touching my skin, how my fingers touch each other, where my hair is falling, but coming back to contact points on my body. And again, that kind of really centers and grounds. And these are very easy ways of doing that. And you can be in the middle of a conversation. I could be in the middle of a speaking event and I can do it. And that's why it's such a handy tool. It's not that I have to take time out and meditate for 45 minutes, which I'll anyways do. But this is something that I have available to me. It doesn't matter what I'm doing or who I'm speaking with or what I'm in the middle of. I could be driving. I could be speaking. Yeah, I could just be almost trying to fall asleep in my bed, and it's the same exact principle which gets me where I need to be.
How does this particular thing, like at this point, is it just like unconscious? Like you catch yourself in these moments throughout the day where maybe you're thinking too much in the future or too much in the past, and you didn't say it this way, but clearly that can create a state of anxiety. I guess when you're not focusing on your breath and being in the moment, are you consciously catching this at this point? Or is it just so ingrained in who you are because clearly your mother was telling you this for so long? Is it just unconscious and you just like naturally like click back into like your breath and grounding and sort of getting back into the moment? Like how do you trigger this, if you will?
That's a really good question. And I will say, I think it's becoming aware of the less than optimum states for me. So like I shoot a lot of classes. I'll be shooting a class and I'm like, I'm not feeling it. And that's a reminder to me that I'm not in the present moment. I'm probably thinking of, I think I should say this or I should say that. And I'm not trusting myself enough. And Chris, what happens sometimes when I get into the breath and the grounding, I don't know, sometimes things come out of my mouth, which I don't even know existed in my subconscious mouth. And I'm like, oh my God, like, where did that come from? And they were probably in my subconscious mind all along, right? So that's what happens. That's the magic that happens. And it's non-exhausting. Thinking is exhausting, but flowing is the reverse.
Yeah.
It's energizing.
Have you read any books on flow?
I actually haven't, but Chris, I'm also one of those people, like when I say there is so much knowledge out there, there's so much knowledge within, the way I do it, and this is how all the Vedic sciences were written, is that I say, if I become curious about a topic, I'm just going to invite in my awareness more knowledge about that, more connections related to that subject. And that often for me works better. And then I can read something to validate my experience.
Gotcha.
But usually I first try to go on my own path of self-discovery.
Awesome.
And say, hey, is this feeling like flow? Oh no, that's feeling rigid. This is tight in my body. I can't flow. So like this has been a journey to flow. Honestly, it's been a journey to flow, realizing, becoming really almost hypersensitive to understanding what are the things, all the things that have density cannot have flow. Anything that feels tight cannot be loose and cannot let things flow. So basically, yeah, like really working on that for the last few years.
Yeah, I love the way you approach that too. So much of when I was building the standard, I came to this realization that the amount of people out there that want to or will really take more of like an academic dive into like mental health and well-being, let's I'm speculating here, but I don't think I think there's very few people that are going to read a book, let alone hundreds of books on the topics and try to become a mastery or go through school or whatnot. And I did all that work and I was trying to find like the connection. What's the least amount of stuff people need to know in order to be their best selves? How do I sort of take all that's out there and like oversimplification, say, just focus on this one entry point and like life will become great. And I started to recognize like, yeah, sure, maybe I have some things figured out, but so does everybody else. Like all those people that maybe didn't go to school for this, didn't read the books, like, and this is, I think, to your point here, they have life experience and they've done something, even if it wasn't fully intentional, even if it wasn't with the spirit of how do I become better, like they've learned a way to cope and to deal with life in a way that might be very healthy for them. And I think that is to your point here with flow is you look inward and then maybe if you want some supporting information down the road, you may read something or whatnot. But I'm a true believer that like everybody has that wisdom inside if you can only extract it out. What I will say though, and I've actually read a couple books of flow. Flow is so interesting. And I really do think it's such a cool topic because the way that I've internalized it is it's sort of like picture perfect decision making. It removes like too much thinking of the future and the past, and you're just in the moment. They use endurance athletes a lot in this because if you're an endurance athlete, let's say you're one of those people jumping off a cliff when in those little squirrel suits, you don't have the ability not to be in the moment. Like you have to react very naturally. And the thing that I love about the topic of flow is if you can find a way to get into that pocket, if you will, you are so much more productive in what you can get done. They use examples of like, as a business person, you might be able to accomplish in a day what would take another person an entire week to get done. And so I love the idea of flow. I think it's great. Let me ask you this question though. You didn't phrase it like this, but anxiety is one of the largest mental health conditions on the planet. I think there's something like 300 million plus people that deal with anxiety. Clearly, you know what that is. Is it as simple as just getting people to like focus on breath? Like, is that, I don't want to oversimplify it, but what are your thoughts on like how to help people that are, really anxious?
So I'll tell you, it's when somebody is very, very anxious, Chris, it's going to be very difficult for us to ask them to slow down and focus on their breath. Like that is even scarier for that person. They're like, oh my God, I have to not worry about my worries. Like, are you crazy? Right? Like that's very, very scary. And like, this is why I love the work that I do, Chris, because it combines some of those modalities into more practical tools. It's okay to get help from outside. So which would mean in the work I do is getting a lot of body massages, getting sleep, using oils on your head, even using herbal oils, for, let's say on the top of your head. Certain breath work comes into this, right? Breath work is easier for people who have anxiety rather than coming back to their own natural breath. So all of these things, right? Whether it's sleep, oil massages, oil in other parts of your body, breath work, herbs, they all work really, really well. Then to even water sounds. Even like water sounds, they give one part of your nervous system, like normally a nervous system is all over the place, but they give at least the sense of hearing one standard, note, like the sound. So that by itself, then through the law of coherence, everything else in your nervous system can also start following suit, calms down. So sometimes using those mechanical, practical tools can become really, really helpful till you can bring a person, I think, to a place of that somewhat of balance. And then you find a window into that observation of breath and grounding. Grounding first, grounding is easier to kind of feel your sweatshirt on your skin or, your feet on the ground is much easier than feeling your natural breath.
Yeah, I did a post recently on the 5 sense grounding technique, which is incredibly powerful. But you made a comment earlier, and I think of my little son who had a lot of school anxiety last year. And, he's getting better with his words, and he's like, he would start to say stuff like, he's like, I'm now getting worried because I'm worried. And it's like a vicious cycle where it's like he's just getting so worked up, trying to get him to like calm down. And I think you just said this is like, it's really hard. Like he's revving up his engine so much. I'm curious, is there any validity of like, well, let me come to this question. So I got two questions for you. When you're doing breath, when you're doing this breathing, is there a certain technique to it? Like I know breathing is somewhat, we all know how to do it clearly, but is there a way that you go about it that is more productive for you or gets your head in the right space faster?
Yeah, and I also make a comment about what you said earlier about your son, right? So again, because he's thinking, again, the thinking brain is active. Am I worried? Am I not worried? Am I checking? As long as we're thinking, there is room for anxiety. And flow is exactly that state. Like you talked about endurance athletes, they're not thinking, no future, no past. They're in the moment.
Yeah.
You don't have to make the decision. The decisions are made. You're operating from complete clarity. You've let go of those permutations. There's like just a looseness in your nervous system.
Yeah.
So anyways, it's like that's how I work with my children, like how to get them to a state of zero thinking. That state where you're awake and alert. Just a little bit beneath that lies the magic. Anyway, so how do I look at this, how I have this breath observation? So there's two things. If I'm in a conversation like this and, as we are, I just become aware because do you know, Chris, how many times people actually are not breathing actively? They've actually kind of stopped their breath when they're talking.
My wife does this. She holds her breath and I'm like, you're literally not breathing right now. What's going on with you? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? So then, Chris, it's like just becoming aware that there is a breath happening. It's happening through the nose. It's happening through the mouth. There's still life, and it's a flow, and it's lovely, and it's rhythmic.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say that I feel it very sharply. I don't. But there is an awareness of it. There's awareness for it in my nasal passages. There's awareness for it in my exhales as I'm speaking my words. But let's say I'm not having this conversation with you, but I'm feeling a little, like, for example, I went to India for my clinical training. And I had to work with wounds. And I had these like 10 people in that room, like wanting to give me their advice. Like these are all other students. And they're like, oh my God, are you going to do this? And Chris, I was so nervous in the first day that I was just like, I don't know what I did, right? Then I came back at it. And I said, I know what I need to do. My body knows what it needs to do. And I literally got into a zone where I was exhaling. Right. And when it's hard for people, I tell them just hum, because humming is exhalation and it always has to be nasal. Like if you're breathing, you're just exhaling or being, longer exhales, it has to be through your nose. So either I just do nice long exhales from my nose. So if I'm functioning, I'll like kind of trying to make a rhythm. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, as I'm moving my hands, as I'm doing what I'm doing when I'm not speaking. That's the breath technique. Even the humming is like that. The humming is a natural exhalation. So when that's hard for people, and like literally, this is what I remember doing when I was cleaning up that wound where I was just humming. And there was constant exhalation. Everybody else in the room did not exist. And I cannot even tell you, Chris, I think the job I did that day was what a doctor would do in 10 years of practice. Yeah. Because I was just so present with this. And the funny part is that even though my mom tells me I should tell you how I stumbled upon this, right? Like how I stumbled upon this state of mind and like why this works for me, I must say this. When I was in school and in India, you have really long exams. Like you have to write these really long answers and you have to study for days. And Chris, I didn't care to do it. Like honestly, I didn't care to study for a long time. So I would come to the exam And I always wanted to leave the exam first because I wanted to go out and be, like have fun, go to the cafeteria, get some food. So I used to say, I'm going to really focus in on this exam, read the question, and take my best guess at it. And then I would just write. And then somehow I did really, really well. And I was really present and I did really well, but I never understood. And then at some point, I remember my mom telling me that, Nidhi, without studying, you do so well. Why don't you study? And I said, okay, I'm going to crack this. And then I studied really hard. And guess what? I did very poorly. Honestly, I like from being a 90 plus percentile student, I came to a 60% that particular exam. And I was so frustrated. I'm like, what have I done? Like, why is it not working for me? And I realized because I was overthinking it.
Yeah.
But every time before that, I trusted that I know I can tap into my life experience. Things that are technical, of course, but I even teach my kids to learn technical things with the breath and through the back of the brain, and to sit back and be a little in trance, be a little dizzy, and then take that in. So it really retains. But I realized that really worked for me. It took me a few years to figure out why that was working. That was that state of like, no past, no future, me right here in the present moment. And then I kind of, from my toolkit, picked all the tools that would get me back into that state.
Yeah, I love that. Let me ask you one more question on this, and then we'll pivot over to mindset. And you didn't mention any of this, but I can't help think that there might be a connection. Getting someone to slow down and focus on breath is not always the easiest thing to do. It may not be hard when people are in like maybe mild states of overthinking, but I think of my younger kid, and he would just rev his anxiety up so much. It's just, it's like nothing's getting through. Does nature play a role into this? Does taking someone on a walk, does getting them outside, does that help with getting them to slow down, which then hopefully maybe gets them to focus on the breath to sort of reset them? Could that help at all?
100%, right? Like the trees are breathing us, we are breathing from the trees.
Yeah.
And, just through the law of coherence, right? Like everything in the world, the more out there you are in with more energetic beings, your energies will start aligning. So being in nature naturally feels very, very relaxing because there's an energy exchange that happens. Like there is a rhythm. The trees are doing what they're doing, and you're doing what you're doing. And then the speeds kind of come to an optimum. So I think being in nature in general for children who have anxiety, which I think a lot of kids do, almost all children today do. But like that's why nature time, tree rolling on the grass, listening to bird sounds. And sometimes when that's not possible, even though it's not the same, I'll play water sounds at home.
Yeah.
Like when my older daughter has exams, I'll play water sounds when she's going to sleep, so she can sleep deep. Or I'll give her, I think hugs really help with children. Since we're talking about kids, I want to say this. Sometimes I hold my kids chest to chest and I say, let's breathe together. And that really helps because then automatically they don't even realize, but their body slows down the breath to come to your level.
I like that. Let's pivot over to mindset here. So sort of in the similar structure, is there a particular mindset that is helping you more at this stage of your life that, contributes to your mental health, your well-being, your success?
And I'm so tempted to pick from, like, I have two that really I think helped me a lot on a daily basis, but I'll talk about one, and then if you have time, we can get into the other one just a little bit. But I think one thing that I hold very close to my heart is the experience is always more important than the outcome.
I like that.
And that works for me as a parent, that works for me in the work that I do. It just works for me in life in general. And being a parent actually is representative of who I am everywhere else. Who I am everywhere else is also representative of who I am as a parent. Like I want to take the same person to work, at home. The person who's cooking is the same. The person who's meeting his friends is the same. And it's not about authenticity. It's about like the state of being. It's how I deal with the world around me. which is like, for example, with my children, and they've really taught me a ton, is like, I'm just a witness. And I have to give them safety and structure because that's really only my role, as these souls are doing their own path of self-discovery. And through that, I don't want to distort their experience on this planet. So I'm not the mother who's going to be like, wake up, you have to go to school. Oh my God, you're late. It's 3 minutes. You didn't eat your carrots. Because then the outcome, I might get the outcome and ruin the experience. So it's a really big principle for me. I'm okay to miss a flight, which honestly, because of this, we don't. I'm okay if the kids are late to school, which honestly, they're really rarely ever. I'm okay if like they don't study for an exam. But like I believe in the fact that all of us come for growth. We come to the planet for growth, for discovery, for exploration, as long as we're not conditioned to be in fear. So by creating this whole, even for myself, right, it's always about how is my experience. Like rather than I have to get 100 things done today, I have to make sure that the experience is joyful, it's in flow, and I get more stuff done.
Was there a particular thing that like led to this particular mindset, or like how long have you had this, or was there like an event that you, I guess, over-indexed on maybe the outcome, and then you started to realize like, wow, I'm looking at this wrong? Like where did this originate from? Do you remember?
So I also think that this led to two things that came from two things, right? My mom, who asked me to look at my breath, but she got very stressed when we had to, let's say, go for a trip, or if there was food on the table that was getting cold. And as a result, the dining table felt very unpleasant to me, when mom was hyper. Or going to school, especially when I was younger, like maybe till I was 10 or 12, was just, I remember going to school very like tensed, unhappy. And as a result, I took that version of me to school, who then interacted with people in that manner. And then, it was never something that I enjoyed. And then mom kind of flipped the switch when I was 11, 12, and then I never put two and two together, but it doesn't matter. But when I had my own children, and I realized that, oh my God, sometimes like I was so outcome driven with my little one, right? Like she was hardcore Ayurvedic, like the bedtime, the wake time, like the foods, no thought. But then I saw her one day and I was sitting with my aunt, and my aunt was like, Nidhi, she does not have the playfulness that a child should. Like she was 3.5, Suhani, my older one, right? Who's 15 now. And then it hit me. I said, I have ruined her experience for an outcome that I wanted. Mm. And this, I would say, is also combined with certain times in my life where things just happen magically. Like, I was this wild, crazy person to believe in the middle of the recession. I said, I'm going to finish my master's and I'm not going to apply for a job for 2 months. I'm just going to relax. But I'm going to come back in August and I'm going to apply for a job. And then I'll get a job end of August. And then I'll be working from September. And then this will happen. But I was so much in flow that it happened exactly like that, right? So I had the plan, I had the integrity, I had the present moment, I had the lack of worry. And I really made it an enjoyable experience. But every time I did that, like there are times in my life where I felt like, oh, that was a common state of mind. What was common about all of these times when I manifested? Oh, it was that state of mind. And it's the same thing. It's the flow, it's the experience, it's not becoming so rigid and attached to what needs to happen. Which it anyways does, which honestly, Chris, it just happens.
Oh my God, I feel like there could be a whole podcast on this right here. I can't help but when you said it's the experience, not the outcome. I don't know, the way I'm internalizing that, maybe it's just the way that I want to look at it. A big one that I've been working on, and it might even just be my mission for like the next decade on a personal level, is like enjoy the journey, not the destination. And it's because for me, and I think this is true for a lot of people that set themselves goals or want to achieve things, like it's so easy to just get wrapped up in when I get this promotion, when I get this job, when my kids hit this age, when we accomplish this, when we, who knows what it is. And it's like, I don't know, I maybe it's just getting a little older. You start to achieve some of those things. And at least for me specifically, I'm like, if I don't enjoy the journey, it's very hazy from point to point. And the point to point is my life. Like it's like the actual moment that something happens, whether it was selling my first company or graduating college or whatever, like those moments are beautiful, but they last like a second. Like it's only a moment in time. And I don't know, I found myself, if all I do is pay attention to getting to that moment and it only lasts a moment, be it a day, a week, or whatever, I'm like, wow, I could literally, like, my entire life could fly by because I just did not enjoy the journey. Oh, that's how I'm internalizing that of like,
No, and
so,
I think that's absolutely true. Like to me, it's like I cannot have the outcome at the cost of the journey. Like the journey can't pay for the outcome. Like it has to be. I mean, outcomes are great, but like you've already planned it. Now enjoy the journey. You're already on your way. You'll get there. But if I'm going to sprain my ankle and I'm going to bump into some bushes and trample over a few people, I don't want to do that. I'd rather like enjoy the process because I already know where this road leads.
yeah. Let me ask you this, and obviously this is your mindset. So I'm going to ask you to sort of step out of you. There's a lot of people on the planet that struggle, like just struggle. I'm very aware of how fortunate I am. And look, we all have problems. I don't want to make light of that, but there just are a lot of people that have just a lot more problems. And I don't know, I could see somebody listening to this being like, well, that's easy for you to say. Like, I mean, your life isn't as bad as my life. And so I'm curious that, once again, your mindset, but somebody that is struggling, whatever the struggle might be, this concept that you have, this mindset, is somewhat optimistic, at least the way that I'm interpreting it, of how do you grow through situations and be optimistic and sort of take life for what it is. What advice might you give somebody that is in a little bit of a darker place, but yet maybe they should still take lessons out of where they're at? Like, I don't know, how would you apply this mindset to somebody who's struggling a little bit more?
Yeah. And Chris, can I go into my own personal story
Yeah,
of struggle
yeah,
and
please.
how things through this? So look, we all have, and it's all relative. Like, so I'm not going to say, oh, my struggle was huge. No, it wasn't. But to me, we all feel, we all feel the intensity of our own pain. That's how it is. Somebody could have a finger cut and feel like, oh my God, and some could have an amputated arm and feel the same in that moment. In that moment, all pain is real. So the truth is, Chris, I came to this country in an arranged marriage. And I'm not saying arranged marriages don't work. They do sometimes, many times. But it was a very different situation. I come from this huge, loving, joint family. I'm really desperately invited into this place, into this family, with a lot of let's say marketing, lobbying. And I'm not going to blame anybody because everybody comes with their individual natures. But the experience that I had was like, let's say that I'm a child and somebody invites you for like a play date. Say, oh, like the mother invites you, you must come and play with my child. You must come and play with my child. It's beautiful. We have this, we have that. And then you go, and I'm that other playmate, right? And I'm living in a house with parents and their son. But the experience is that the minute you enter the house, the door is locked. And then your playmate is like, I don't want to play with you. Don't talk to me. Because I don't talk to anybody. I'm busy with my toys. And, please stay away from me. Everybody is a threat. But that was me. Like I was the playdate who had come into like this whole scenario where I just did not understand what was happening. And it took me so long. I was so naive. I come from such a loving place and family that it was mind boggling to me to even understand what is, I didn't watch TV. I didn't watch any shows. I didn't know these things can happen.
Yeah.
And, so first, I started with doing everything that I could, fighting, be like, why is this like this? Why is this not happening? And then nothing came out of it. Each time I was more I felt more tormented within. And then after a few years of that situation, I started taking time to say, let me change in myself what I can. One of the reasons why I didn't feel sure whether I was reading things right or wrong is because I was like, maybe I'm impetuous, maybe I'm hasty, maybe I'm reading this wrong, maybe I'm too sensitive. All I did is went into this great journey of self-discovery. I stayed with myself. I kind of practiced this flow. I slowed down. I let things unfold. I invited the truth. I sat back to witness. And Chris, it took me 14 years to get out of there, by the way, 1-4. And I didn't do it at a time that I was feeling that I was in immense pain. I didn't do it when I was not tolerant. I actually came to a place of freedom and tolerance, like to a finding of myself, that it was, I cannot even say that I left. I can just say that it shed away. It was such a natural falling off,
Yeah.
Because it's like this, that you've been wearing, let's say, size 14 pants and you're size 4, and you're putting this belt and you're so angry with these pants. Like, why is it not fitting me? Why is it not fitting me? This is so uncomfortable. And then you realize, hey, like, this is who I really am. Then you only choose things that work for you. And it was very compassionate. It was very loving. And I got out of there, right? But it was difficult. This is like right at the start of the pandemic. Even the process started before that, right? But I had to leave from New Jersey, move to New York, do it with 2 children. I had no support of family. No friends were coming. But it's okay, because that was the best time of my life.
Yeah.
Like, it was the best time of my life, because these are the exact tools that actually do support you through those really, really dark times. Listen, I've had some crazy stuff in my life, right? Like, I've lost a lot of loved ones in my life personally. And I've seen my aunt struggling with cancer really hard, like the closest aunt to me. I was probably the closest person to her. She was right here, close to where I live in Connecticut. And I saw her every week. And like, that's also, she's one of the reasons why I do what I do as well, right? So I think through just seeing, right, like how life works, we come, we go through our struggles, we die, we move on, something else comes. This is the journey of life. Honestly, seeing struggle, seeing people through life and death and disease has actually taken me to the other side of like understanding that life is lived in this moment, in the moment that you have now. If you miss the moment of life, this right here, you've missed life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I totally feel you. We've lost some family members to cancer, and I don't know, death is a very interesting thing to reconcile with on a personal level, but I do think if you can be patient with it, I don't know, personally, I think it reminds us of how special the moment is. And I recognize everybody's in a different spot, but I mean, we are here and gone in a blink of an eye. It may not feel that way sometimes, but on the scale of the cosmos, I mean, we are so insignificant. And I don't know, I actually take comfort in the fact of like, dude, it is a big party down here. We should try to make it as such if we can. I've got one more question for you. It's a question I really enjoy, and I'm curious because you actually did a post about this not too long ago, but I'm not going to mention the post to just see where you go with this. But I'm really sensitive to the human condition and to like humanity, and there's just so much that happens on our planet that makes no sense to me whatsoever. And there's a lot of issues that we face as a society. And so I'm curious from your perspective, if we could wave a wand over all humanity, all 8 billion plus of us, what habit or mindset do you feel would nudge all of humanity in a more loving and kind direction?
I think surrender, trusting the order of the universe. If I have to say it like that, if I have to say it, if it's something external, I'll say it like that. But also the couple of other things that I say, that not mindset, but I think as a collective, becoming more mindful of the children that we raise, right? Like healing as parents and bringing that to our children. I think that's an actual promise of changing the world. That's our best bet, in my opinion, more than anything else. But otherwise, it's just like if I actually wave the wand, to me, the reason why we are here is when man thinks he's more intelligent than nature has caused all distortion in our planet. Our planet only evolved till this point. This is a point where our planet, like only wonderful things happen from ice age to stone age to like, we've just only evolved as a species. It's become beautiful. But now we are at this point where we're like, hello, we're damaging our planet and we're seriously damaging. And the only thing that's changed, and we call this Kali Yuga in the Vedic world, is human thinks that they're smarter than nature.
Yeah. It was interesting. You actually did go. I was looking at your post, and the post that you had on this particular one is every parent would be trained to raise a healthy, mindful, and conscious future generation, most of the problems in the world would be eliminated in 20 to 30 years.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I actually really like that. There's a quote, and I'm always trying to do stuff on nature here, but I do think there's such a profound connection to, I don't know, I did a lot of research, and not that this is an episode on climate change, but I did a lot of research on climate change specifically, because I do think that there are some very profound things that pose really severe risk to humanity. AI is one of them. I think climate change is another. So I read all these books, and having had such a background on the individual and self-development, I couldn't help but see such profound connections between how we take care of our planet versus how we take care of ourselves. And for me, and I think some people would agree with this, maybe not everybody, is like, there is no separation. We are all interconnected. It's not like Earth and humans. It's like, no. Like, we're all part of the same ecosystem. And there's this great quote that says, we do not inherit the Earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children.
Oh,
And I really enjoy that one, because it's so true. We're just going to be here for a moment. We're going to be gone. And like, I'm going to leave my kids behind. And I mean, like, I hope they're in a better spot than I am. And I don't think we're all feeling that way at the moment, but I love the idea that like we're borrowing it. That's all we're ever doing. We don't own any of this stuff. So
that's a very strong one. That's like scary and strong, but it's very, very true. Yeah. And I think you and I think very alike, right? Like we're just that's what all my work says. We're part of this bigger ecosystem. And once we realize our role and place in it, we really learn to align our beats, align our rhythms. And then there's music.
Yeah. Well, Nidhi, this has been so awesome. I feel like I could just continue to talk to you. I've got so many questions, but I want to respect the fact that you got some kids you got to probably go pick up here.
Yeah.
Where can people go to learn a little bit more about you?
So to find me on a regular basis is my Instagram, _Ayurvedic_life, where I post like little snippets every day, updates. But my website, which is nidhipandia.com as well, where all my offerings, my courses, all the work I do is listed upon there.
Okay, awesome. And we'll include all that stuff in the show notes. I feel like, I don't say this to every guest, but as we move through season 1, I'm definitely going to have you back on the podcast, because I feel like there's so many cool things that we could have dove into that we just couldn't based on time. But thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for sharing some of your wisdom. And it's been so great to get to learn a little bit more about you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. And, really likewise, you're just a really wise man.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Standard. Before we go, click on the link in the show notes of this episode to learn more about today's guest. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody who you think would benefit from it as well.